Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Carnegie Investor Webinar. I'm Terry Stinson, Non-Executive Chairman at Carnegie. I'm currently in the US, and joining me from Perth is our CEO of Carnegie, Jonathan Fieve. Thank you all for attending and taking the time to join us this morning in Perth. The purpose of today's webinar is to go through the company's recent progress. It also provides an opportunity for some questions and discussion with shareholders at the end. Questions can be typed in anytime via the question tab on your screens, and our moderator from FTI Consulting will read out the questions at the end of the presentation. I'll now hand over to Jono to take the presentation from Perth.
Yeah, thanks, Terry, and thanks everyone who's joined us online. I'm happy to give you an update on where we're at and where we're going. I'd like to start with a run through about animation that was launched last week. It's very fast paced, so I'll do my best to keep up with it. Just loading the animation now. So as the animation begins, you may notice that the sun is setting and the wind turbines aren't spinning. And I think this really highlights the excellent complement to established renewables that wave energy offers. Waves are still powering when solar and wind isn't. So onto the operation of CETO. Wave forces act in a circular motion and drive CETO in the same way. The three power takeoffs inside the buoy convert this motion into electricity. This conversion happens thanks to a belt that's secured at one end to the seabed and the other end on a drum which turns the generator as CETO moves. Optimal control to extract the most from each wave is achieved using the AI controller we've developed with our partners HPE. Finally, electricity is exported via the dynamic cable. Now, survivability in storms is key, and CETO has a unique feature whereby it submerges well below the surface to avoid these damaging forces. But really importantly, generation continues. CETO is modular, intended to be built in large arrays that power cities and communities. You may notice in this next ending portion, we pan out from Spain and over to Australia to recognise those places that are important in the sense that Spain is the location of our next CETO project, which we're targeting deployment for next year. If you didn't already know about our technology and how it works, I hope that gives you a good starting point. The animation is available on our website and has a much more professional narrator than the one you've just heard, so you can go back and take time to digest it and understand more about how it works. Okay, so this next slide really speaks to Carnegie's purpose and the fundamentals of wave energy. And the first thing is probably the most notable thing is the size of the resource. So the International Panel for Climate Change has coined it as the largest untapped renewable resource. It's very consistent. So many of the good sites don't stop producing this wave energy ever. They continue throughout the year and every day. The oceans, you can think of them kind of like batteries. They store the energy from the wind that's blown over them, and that energy then arrives at shore in the form of waves, sometimes days or many days after that wind has actually applied that energy to the waves. The other thing we know is that it's very predictable. So this is of huge value to the network operators, and we know what's coming well in advance. It's also very complementary. As I mentioned before, we can help avoid the need for enormous and expensive levels of battery storage to help keep the integrity of the grid. In fact, in a recent study on effects of the grid in Ireland, it showed taxpayers could save about £1 billion in energy system saving costs from having a few gigawatts of wave on their network. And I guess for us, the way we see it is, it's hard to believe that we won't see considerable wave energy development in the future, and Carnegie is a global leader in the space. And we don't make this claim without basis. From the 36 applicants in the Europe Wave PCP competitive program, which was judged externally by independent experts, Carnegie and our CETO technology and the project we proposed was ranked #1. And that's a huge testament to the skill of the team and their efforts, but it also shows the strength in the technology. And the criteria for this judgment was very comprehensive. It included obviously cost of energy, but crucially reliability and survivability as well. We subsequently offered an enhanced version of the project to Spanish and Basque government funders who were impressed enough to award us extra funding, additional funding through various programs. And by the end of, or sort of through the back end of financial year 23, we're awarded about 11.5 million in Australian dollars in these merit-based awards. So I think that's great validation for what Carnegie offers. And I think what sets us apart from the other technologies and the other offerings is, first of all, we have a growing wealth of evidence showing that the cost of energy is on track to be competitive with the more established renewables like offshore wind as we scale up. The capacity of CETO as well is around 1 megawatt at the commercial scale, and that is one of, if not the largest in the industry. And we all know bigger is better in most cases in the energy sector. CETO is fully submerged, and this is a great benefit to us from reducing the visual amenity issues. And we're seeing a lot of pushback in Australia from offshore wind developments due to that visual impact. Also, our grid connection onshore is fairly negligible. Really, it's just a small building and the connection there. So that all plays into, I guess, a really low impact package that we can offer the community. And finally, the control system. So as we've said, we're using a world first AI tech that we've developed with HPE, and it gives us both efficiency advantages and safety advantages. We're the only tech that we know of that dynamically adjusts that submergence to throttle the wave energy as storms come through. A lot of IP is tied up in this control, and the good thing is it's relatively easy to protect it because it's hidden away in code that no one can see. Unlike a mechanical system which people could take photos of or see from the shore. We also have a spin-off technology which is more power. We have a few others, but that's the core one, and we'll go into further detail on more power further in the presentation. But it's not enough to have an enormous resource and world-leading tech. We need clearly a market to sell it into. The good news is that the market is enormous. You can see on the slide here, we've got 70% of the world surface covered by the ocean, but globally, only 20% of the world's energy is sourced renewably at the moment. So there's 80% left that we've got to do, and that's huge, and it's growing as well because electrification is gathering pace. In Australia, the Australian Electricity Market Operator forecasting around a 4 times increase in electricity demand in the future due to this electrification of everything, not just vehicles. Of course, we have the geopolitical issues in Europe that have supercharged their efforts to support ocean energy, and they have a target of 40 gigawatts by 2050. Climate change, of course, is gathering pace, unfortunately, and that means to mitigate it will become increasingly valuable if you have the tech that does that. So that all feeds into the International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA's, expectations that 350 gigawatts of electricity will be sourced from ocean energy by 2050. So talking about what Carnegie does, and to sell into this enormous and growing market. Obviously, we're the technology developer of the products and services related to our core technology, CETO. We also have the more power technology, and we have the more intentioner, which is a component of both those two, but also has other applications. And really the tech that drives this efficiency, the wave predictor and the AI control tech, could potentially be spun off into the future. And while a lot of our systems use commercial sort of off-the-shelf equipment, we're really an integrator of those components. So our team are experts in the assembly, the testing, and the commissioning of the kinds of components that go into CETO. We've done that with CETO itself in former generations, and we're doing it now with more power. Installation offshore is really a core competency, and it's a key risk for developers. So it's integral in the way we've designed CETO and the more power systems. That sort of installation thinking has really gone into their design. And the increasing use and complexity of software at the heart of the system, like the control system, means we're not just a provider of sort of the tangible technology, we're also a provider of software upgrades, and that leads to a recurring revenue stream over the course of operation. And before these projects are even built, Carnegie's asked to provide engineering services to really develop the projects, to develop the concepts, to apply a relevant experience in offshore construction, and consulting even on the broader plant design, cabling, and grid connection. And once these plants are operating, there's a huge opportunity for recurring revenue in the sense of, we're operating the plant. Carnegie's undertaking maintenance on the parts that we really understand, and making repairs and upgrades on the bulk of the system, which is the CETO technology. So how do we generate revenue and profits from this work? Well, I alluded to it before, but there's a number of financial models within the overall business model that vary from project to project and client to client. But royalties are potentially a significant revenue stream that will last for the length of the project. Of course, we supply the major portion of equipment. Probably in the order of 75% of the capex would be the CETO equipment that's provided for a project, and we'll earn a margin on the sale of that equipment. We also earn a margin, of course, on the services I mentioned before, pre-project activities, feasibility, design, construction. For instance, there might be environmental approvals that are required by the developer, and to make those approvals, they need to understand how CETO works and what it's made of and how it could interact with the environment. So that's work that we can do ahead of the project, and that could be 4 years ahead of a project where revenue starts to flow in from the essentially the consulting work that we're doing. And of course, especially for the wave energy conversion part, we earn a margin on the services to operate and maintain, as I mentioned before. So diving a little deeper on the market size that we touched on before, if we extrapolate out some of the near-term targets of the European Commission, they've set a target of a gigawatt by 2030, and they have targets going forward. But just to put some rough numbers around it, you're talking about €5 billion of capex related to CETO and this is just for Europe, this 1 gigawatt, I should say. And so a modest share of this would be a significant portion of the revenue. The European Commission also have price targets, which shows our model, which our models show to be achievable. So that means that we would be the technology of choice in many cases for developers. While Europe is definitely leading the way, there is progress elsewhere. As I said before, Irene is seeing 350 gigawatts by 2050. So yeah, that's a lot outside of Europe. The US haven't stated specific targets, but they are ramping up very quickly with over 100 million US allocated to ocean energy via the Department of Energy. An example of that is the PackWave development, which is a test site in Oregon. It's a bit similar to the Biomap site that we're accessing in Spain, but it's based in Oregon, and it will become an opportunity for Carnegie to deploy in the US. We've actually already been a beneficiary of a modest amount of the funding that's been available from DOE in the form of a project where we're working with NREL, or the National Renewable Energy Lab, on wave energy modelling. Australia also seems to be turning a corner. It's early days, but ARENA has funded projects in the past, wave projects in the past. They've just been recapitalised in the latest budget to the tune of $7 billion. So, that's a promising development. We're also seeing offshore wind push into Australia, as you've probably heard, and this has the benefit of waking up the policymakers to the benefits and the power of the ocean, and that's meant a development process has been put in place, which is good news. It is fair to say that some communities aren't loving the prospect of giant offshore wind structures interrupting their view, so it's great that we can offer an alternative, and I think that will open doors for us. We do hope Australia will build a strategy around the ocean energy, as there is a closing window of opportunity there to build some sovereign capability in the space and avoid this sort of status quo that we see of just importing technology once the market's developed. So, and we have probably the world's best wave energy resource. So we've got a lot going for us, but yeah, we're needing some action soon. So going back to Europe, just to get into more detail of our flagship CETO project, we call it Achieve. The cornerstone supporter of the Achieve project is the Europe Way program, which was a competitive program. I mentioned before, we were awarded a phase 1 contract from 36 applicants. We undertook design, tank testing through phases 1 and 2. We were paid about $1.5 million Aussie for that work. I think in phase 2 we submitted around 1,000 pages of results and plans, including tank test data and so forth. And notably, that phase 2 tank test included, for the first time ever, we think, an AI-based RL controller, or reinforcement learning controller, supported by Hewlett Packard. And yeah, first time has been used in a wave energy device that's actually operated in physical terms. And after submitting all those plans, for phase 3, we're ranked number 1 of the remaining 5 developers, and that got us through to the final round as the number 1 of the final 3, I guess, and first choice on where to deploy. And we'd already started building capacity in Spain, so it was great to be able to choose the BMEP site in the Basque Country and continue the work we've been doing there. So this phase 3 contract will see Carnegie paid about 6 million Australian dollars, but we have since then secured a couple more sources of funding from the Spanish and Basque governments to enhance the project. And I should point out that these funding sources were focused on marine renewables, and we don't see that in Australia, unfortunately. It's always coming from a broader pot. But feel free to lobby your local members on that. Yeah, we'd love to have more focused ocean energy funding and support mechanisms in Australia. So in total, we're receiving a bit over 7 million euros for this project. So yeah, CETO isn't our only product. as I mentioned, more power is a key opportunity in the aquaculture space. And it's complementary because it uses the power takeoff technology from CETO, and so improvements can feed back and forth between the two as a result. We also have our wave predictor and mooring tensioner technologies. They're important to both CETO and more power, but they have their own sort of market potential, and we're exploring that as time permits. More power has a high level of focus from the team at the moment, as we're receiving good interest from the aquaculture industry, support from the Blue Economy CRC. Tassal and Huon are the core aquaculture partners in that project. They're the largest producers in Australia, produce about over 90% of Australia's salmon that Australians buy in the supermarket. This is a tiny amount compared to Norway, Chile, Canada, Scotland, the heavy hitters in aquaculture. So there's a huge international market opportunity. Essentially, the way it works is they use these barges to store and distribute food for the salmon in adjacent pens, and in many cases have more than 1 megawatt of diesel capacity to power those feeding operations. And they're having to move offshore even more just to lower their environmental impact and improve fish health. So that's great from our perspective because there's more waves there. And it also builds the case for wave because the logistics become much more difficult when they're further from shore. They're exposed to waves. These operations are risky, and so more autonomy is really what they're after. Ultimately, we're targeting a product that can help them abate their diesel consumption to completely, to 100%. And this we're in the process of doing that. I'm going to show a video. So the scale demonstrator that you'll see in this video, it was conceived as a way to quickly demonstrate to future customers and funders the function of the technology. So the capability of our team to design and build it and operate it was also demonstrated, and of course we generated the data that validates the extrapolation up to commercial scale. The video shows the process of how we went about the deployment, and now you're seeing a video of on board. So, and I think what was really important about this is it's showing the tracking of the system to follow the belt and ensure good wrapping of the belt on the drum, which was a key uncertainty. And it's also a feature of the CETO power takeoff. So, as I say, these projects feed back and forth. We have been deployed through summer. We were deployed from sort of January to April, but we did see some energetic seas, and it was really great to see functional performance. And this has really removed a lot of key uncertainties from future designs. I just returned with 3 team members from the Blue Economy CRC's annual workshop, and we had partners there, Tassal and Huon, seeing these videos and much more detailed results, some of which you can see in a recent ASX announcement that we put out. But yeah, it really helps them in terms of building the confidence so that they're supportive of installing the larger version of this technology onto their barges. So I guess just in summary, in terms of the projects, we have really three core projects that we're working on. As I mentioned, the CHI program, which is the CETO deployment in Europe. We have the More Power demonstrator in Australia, as you've just seen, but also we haven't really spoken about Garden Island, and that continues to be a valuable asset that we earn revenue from through power sales to defence, and we really hope that Wave Energy again will be associated with this site as we have an offshore lease, and we're working towards that outcome. Now, we can't do this alone. We have some really helpful and supportive partners. This is a selection of the key ones, but just picking up on Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, they have been a partner for over 6 years, and the relationship was initially built on the supercomputing technology that we were using for our simulations. They then brought to the table the AI capability, and we've had a collaboration agreement around that AI controller for that time. And in fact, I'll be traveling to the US next week for their sort of famous Discover event, which Carnegie has actually a part to play in, which I can't reveal the details at this stage, but it's pretty exciting. In terms of news, so we're also putting a lot of effort into getting the word out and telling the story. We've seen quite good exposure in traditional mediums. For example, I had an opinion piece in The Australian, which is obviously a very well-known masthead here. Our social media game has also stepped up, and we have a pretty large and growing follower base of 10,000 on LinkedIn and about 3,000 on Twitter or X, and about 8,000 on our email subscriber list. So that's good, and that's growing, and it's certainly helping to get the word out. And you'd be surprised who follows us on social media only, and they don't read the newspapers. They just follow us on social media. There's quite some important people do that, and like it or hate it, it is an important communication medium that we can't ignore. So we certainly put some effort into that, and I just encourage that if you're not signed up to at least one of these sources, I suggest you do, and you can find the links to that on the bottom of our website, because we can offer much more regular news on those platforms than we can on the stock market platform. Okay, so summing up, I think we've just achieved so much recently, and we've done so in a very capital efficient way, and that's set to continue. We've been independently judged as a leading technology, which has been fantastic. We're at the point of purchasing CETO components, generators, gearboxes, etc., for our first European deployment in Spain. And the largest and the most progressive utilities in the world are starting to take notice. A lot of them are European based, and they don't want to be left behind in this emerging market as they may have been in other emerging technologies. We have a plan which we're executing in parallel to secure a scale array project. So that's where we go to full scale and multiple units deployed. So we're working to secure that contract. We've evolved our business model. We've got multiple sources of revenue identified. And of course, this is all happening on a backdrop of increasing efforts to tackle climate change. There's the geopolitical pressures to utilise local energy sources, and of course, the hunt for more consistent supplies amongst the variable renewable technologies. So yeah, I think, well, I probably just mentioned as well, the more power deployment. I guess that's a key success that we've had recently as well, and that's leading to positive discussions that we had last week about the next phase of more power, which is to deploy on a commercial operating aquaculture barge. And finally, most importantly, we have a team that's both passionate and capable to build upon this great progress we've made in recent years. So I thank them for that. And I'll wrap up now. But yeah, there seems to be some good questions coming in. But I'd like to really thank you all for the support you've offered. Our efforts to build a great business that does good things for humanity needs support and needs your interest. So thank you. Okay, well, we're going to jump to some questions here. We have had some provided prior to the meeting. I'll do a few of those, and then time permitting, we'll obviously fit as many in as we can, but we'll then move to the online questions. So the first question here is regarding the EuropeWave project. It says, when the deployment occurs and electricity is being supplied to the Spanish grid, will this occur under a supply agreement? And will we get paid for the sale of electricity? So yeah, as part of the EuropeWave project, BMEP, or the Biscay Marine Energy Platform, has its own grid connection that we use, and we get to utilise as part of the project. And we also get the revenue from the sale of electricity there. It's worth saying that the EuropeWave scale is smaller than the commercial scale, so it will produce less than a commercial unit. But yeah, we will get paid for that. Okay, another question is, has Carnegie approached the federal or state government for direct funding to deploy CETO to supply electricity under the current agreement with Defence, or increase the capacity of the solar grid that's supplying Defence? So yeah, we haven't recently done that. I guess, as a small company, a technology developer, we're looking for the best opportunities that give us the best bang for buck. And EuropeWave, the first two phases are 100% funded, and significant funding for phase 3. So we've really focused on that, but there remains a good opportunity to bring Wave back to Garden Island, and also improve the output of the solar system there, which will obviously improve the revenue. So we're working in the background on that. I'll do one more of the questions online. What is the status of any potential projects in the US? So the US is a really interesting market that's emerging. The Inflation Reduction Act that was brought in recently has earmarked a lot of funding for renewable energy technologies. In concert with that, the Packwave facility in Oregon, which is an offshore test site, has multi-megawatt connections ready to go. Well, it will do soon. I think it's been commissioned this year. So that presents a really good low risk opportunity to get in there, and sounds like there'll be some really good funding there. So we are increasing our interest in the US, and as the support increases. As I say, I'm travelling there next week for the Hewlett-Packard discussion, but there'll also be other discussions related to potential activities there. So yeah, we're pretty excited about the US. Okay, I'll move to some questions online. Okay, so the first one is that we've got here is, as a shareholder since 2008, I'm growing impatient. Is cash flow in view in my lifetime? Well, I'm sorry, I don't know how old you are, but yeah, I would certainly think so. I mean, we're what we're seeing, and what I sort of try to describe in that sort of revenue model set of slides is really that the revenue starts up to 4 years ahead of the project. So, and I should reiterate that we see Carnegie as a technology developer. We don't intend to be a project owner, meaning that ideally the project owners are big utilities, and they will want to develop these projects, and that will then give them a foothold as in this emerging market. But to do that, they're going to need the input of the technology experts, and that's where we come in, and that's where we can be paid, I guess, for that expertise. Why is there a closing window of opportunity for wave energy development in Australia? Yeah, what I meant by that is not so much it's not a closing opportunity for wave energy. It's more a closing opportunity for Australia to have a sovereign capability. You know, if you look back at the work Denmark did in the wind industry, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. I think I might have mentioned them at the last webinar, but you know, the ratio of money invested in the early days of wind to what they now earn from exports in wind technology is incredible. So what I think there is, you know, wave energy is nascent enough that if a country was to really get behind it and really build the capability, it may end up being as Denmark was for wind. So I think that's an opportunity, and we know with the recent Made in Australia Act, you know, there's great sentimental support for things that are made locally, and so yeah, I would really encourage the government. I encourage you to sort of, in turn, encourage the government to have a look at wave energy and consider it as an opportunity for a sovereign capability.
Yeah, John, I could add to that. You know, as it relates to the other renewable technologies, they're all now offshore. You know, solar is mostly from China. The wind turbines are Europe and the United States. We could be we could be the new place where the wave energy comes from. Being number one with Europe Wave puts us in the front seat.
Terry, do you want to continue with this question? Why would I continue to support Carnegie in the new fundraising offer?
Well, I'll give you a personal perspective, and that is having been with the company now through this transition period, which John has led. It's the most exciting time for me as the chairman in the company. I feel like we have more potential than we've ever had. We currently have more external funding support than we've ever had. We have an incredible amount of interest. Uh, as it relates to the previous, to the current, the competition that Carnegie went through with Eurocroy pitted us against over 30 others and through various phases. And this was a very commercial project. It wasn't a government grant. This was where we had to compete against other technologies, and then we had to go through panels and be assessed by experts, and we dealt with a purchasing team. And that's what I'm used to from my commercial background. It really makes our technology more relevant because we've been tested externally and tested extensively, and we've still made it through the next phases. And we've been supplemented with our to fund this continuing technology development. The investment on the side of you're investing in a renewable, a new renewable that I feel is one of the best in the world and will complement wave and solar. And as a shareholder, uh, I'm going to invest because this last phase is co-funded for us to be able to take our company forward. We've had the external funding come in, which is incredibly significant, as John said, around $11 million Australian. But we have to be able to put our share in to take the technology forward. So that's another reason. And lastly, I do see that revenue. I can't specifically say when it'll come. John has covered why it's important and when, and the fact that 4 years before we'll start seeing some revenue from engineering, we might see some licensing, we might see some royalties. So I feel like that is nearer term than it has ever been in my time as chairman. So those are the reasons from my perspective. I don't know, John, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a good summary, Terry. Thank you. There are a couple of questions on desalination and you know why this is no longer sort of a feature of our technology and I guess the narrative around it. Essentially, desalination that it was used in a way back when we had more of a hydraulic design. It was used in a way to absorb some of that hydraulic energy directly before we went to electricity, and thereby cutting out a transformation of energy and cutting out therefore efficiency loss. Um, the the reason we went away from hydraulics is just, while it seems simple on the surface, it's actually complicated. And when you scale up, you end up with huge volumes of fluid that you have to manage and transport over relatively long distances. And of course, as we saw the offshore wind industry pick up, electrical cables became very cost effective. So I guess that's the reason why I went away from hydraulic, and part of the reason why we we kind of moved aside from desalination, or at least deintegrated it in the way it was. But desalination still remains a valuable and complementary demand for the energy that we produce in the electrical form, because it's kind of like a storage of energy. It's a storage of fresh water that we can actually choose when to produce. So, for instance, if you're powering an island with wave energy at night, there might be plenty of wave energy, but not much electrical consumption. So, if you have a desalination system where it's very cheap to store water, of course, tanks are very cheap. You can ramp that desalination system up to consume the energy you're collecting from the waves, produce the water overnight, and then have that water available the next day, and where you can turn the desalinator off and allow the energy to feed into the other things that people need as they go through their sort of waking hours.
Good answer.
Okay, so array, we have here a question here. It says array deployment has been contemplated for more than a decade. Jonathan's speech is lots of fluff, no serious details about a commercial deployment. I mean, we obviously can't give details before we have them. At this stage, we strategically chose to enter the Europe Wave project because it was incredibly well funded. It was absolutely the best way to fund our first deployment in Europe of the new CETO design. The thing is that now, in terms of the European funding, is that they're now funding the arrays. So there's specific calls for wave energy arrays. There's one's just completed and been awarded, and we're expecting another one will happen next year. So yeah, I guess can't sort of provide any details about things that haven't been cemented, but we are definitely on the path to commercial arrays. And some might ask, oh, why are you always talking about funding and government funding and support? Why can't we just go and do it? Well, that's because these emerging technologies require a lot of capital to get developed and deployed, and we would rather not spend shareholders' money in full. We'd rather leverage considerable funding and support from these government programs that are designed to support this development. So, the first two stages of Europe Wave were 100% funded. The third stage is, I'm not sure it's exactly, but it's kind of in the 80, 90% funded. So, the company only needs to contribute a relatively small portion, and I think that's a much, much better outcome for shareholders. And we also were working in a very formal process, and gives much more credibility to the company's activities.
Maybe, John, I'll
Okay,
just add a little bit more.
Yeah.
Just again,
Go
from
ahead,
my
Joe.
perspective, I just want back to the response of how I've been a shareholder a long time. I just want to acknowledge and respect that our shareholders have been with us for a long time, and that and we really appreciate the continued support. But the company changed a bit. Just a few years ago, we put a path of new technology. We've changed the way we operate, so it's a different company now, and just keep an eye out on what we're doing, and I think you'll see that. It's much more than it is very tangible.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question here on, well, there's a couple of questions from this person. So we have, so some state actors might like to get their hands on the technology and then develop it themselves with a level of funding that's far in excess of what Carnegie has access to. Are there adequate measures to protect the IP? Yeah, so we have, I think the count is about 70 patents. So that's obviously one form of protection, a fairly classical one, tends to protect the more mechanical systems and the configuration. And then, as I mentioned in the presentation, a lot of the intellectual property now is going into the control system and the simulation capacity and all those things, which is very much computer code. And so, yeah, our job is to ensure that that stays within the company. And, we have methods and processes to do that. The question also mentioned hackers. And it's true that, like all companies, we use servers and things that cloud services that could potentially be hacked. But we apply sort of best practice protection for these things, and I think a lot of this code, it would be very hard to understand it from anyone else's perspective in any case. But we're working hard to ensure that it stays certainly within the company. It also evolves very quickly as well. So that what you might find today won't look the same as what there is tomorrow. So that's how we deal with that. And the next question is on a different topic. It's saying, wave power makes great sense for baseload power. It may get cheaper than solar and wind. Can it also be used for peaking or leveling? The short answer of that is it's not targeted towards a sort of peaking scenario. I think that's the space of other technologies. But I think the value that in the sort of more base level supply is actually much higher than the peaking level. So yeah, we think that as I said in the preso, it's a great complement to wind and solar, which is often occurring at different times. Depends where you are, but as I say, this study of the Irish scenario showed that the grid costs were $1 billion less under the with gigawatts of wave energy on the grid, and wave was getting paid about double what the other generators were getting paid because it was producing at the times when others couldn't produce. So yeah, there's a strong business case where the market is set up to reward those that are providing the gap, I suppose, in renewable energy sources that are more variable. We've got one here. Has past history impacted on seeking Australian government funding? So I'll briefly touch on that. Maybe Terry can add to it. I guess possibly I think the Australian government, though, what it's lacking really is a sort of broader strategy on this space. It was very late to the party with offshore wind. If you look at the network plans that AEMO put out, only a couple of years ago had 0 offshore wind in it. So even when they're predicting out decades in advance, no offshore wind mentioned. And now suddenly there's tens of gigawatts being proposed. So I don't think the Australian government has a great track record in being, I guess, having the foresight and the strategy. And yeah, I would hope that they wouldn't be looking toward or looking back at what's gone on in the past to sort of plan out the future. Terry, did you have any more comments on that?
I'll only from my experience doing projects around the world. Um, there was an interest previously from the Australian government and from Western Australian government in wave power. I think across the board there isn't a consistent plan forward, as Jono mentioned, related to wave. But as Australia say catches up, if they decide to catch up with Europe, us being in the lead, us having this deployment done, and proving that we are one of the best technologies, I think everyone will forget if there is a past, they'll forget it, and they're going to be looking for what is the best thing that we can deploy. And the fact that we're sovereign, I think, is going to put us in the lead as when Australia realizes that wave is really important. And as John mentioned earlier in the presentation, Australia has some of the best waves in the world for energy generation. So once it is decided, or if it is decided to deploy it, then I think we'll be right there with something that's ready to go.
Mhm. We're getting close to the end now, but we've got a question a little bit related just on the latest federal budget. Um, do we see significant benefits or opportunities for Carnegie? Yeah, I mean, the 7 billion that went to ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, is a positive move. ARENA has funded wave projects. It's funded Carnegie projects. It's more recently funded a wave project in Tasmania. Um, it doesn't. It sort of hasn't set out a strategy for wave energy or for ocean energy generally, and we've started some discussions just recently, actually, as yesterday, with the departments to try and restore that. We've got the International Conference on Ocean Energy coming to the Southern Hemisphere for the first time ever, going to Melbourne in October. And, there's going to be quite a bit of push by the industry, by the wave energy industry and tidal industry to get more recognition from the Australian government. And I think with this new funding for ARENA, that will be certainly a conversation we're having with them is what's their strategy with this, and can we work together and create one if there isn't one?
And I think, John, related to Australia funding wave energy development, if we go back to more power, the Blue Economy CRC project is an example of Australia funding through the Blue Economy CRC technologies that harness the power of waves for making electricity.
Yeah. Okay, we've got one that's just asking about the follow-on next steps beyond the CETO deployment through the Chi project in Spain, and also for more power. So the deployment in Spain, as I said, we're really working on securing the follow-on, which is a full-scale unit deployed in an array. That's the goal. Almost expanding on that is what we'd really like to see is deployment of an array, probably a small array, because that suits the funding that's available. There's 60% CapEx funding currently for full-scale arrays in Europe, and you can couple that with national funding, so from the national country that where it's being deployed, and that can then take you into the sort of 80s in terms of CapEx support. So these become relatively small investments for big utilities, and we think it's a pretty compelling one to be at the forefront of this emerging technology. So that's really what we're gunning for. We'd like to see that small array be part of a program to go to a larger array. And when we say a larger array, maybe it's 50 megawatts or something like that. So that would be 50 full-scale CETO units, to give you an idea. And in terms of more power, very clear path. What we need to do, we need to deploy, or we need to secure the project that sees more power integrated with an operating feed barge. And those discussions are well advanced with the big players in Australian aquaculture, because that project's supported and facilitated by the Blue Economy CRC. So I think we might be on to the very last few questions. Which are the most credible commercial threats? That's really a great question. Uh, Look, I think one of the biggest commercial threats is really, um, I guess it's related to, you know, action and support for this industry, in at least in an Australian context. It doesn't That doesn't seem to be the issue in Europe, um, but in an Australian context, yeah, I'd say that's the challenge here, because essentially Australia is competing with all the other countries in the world. And when the US announced their Inflation Reduction Act, numerous companies that had technologies that could be funded under that left the country, because they feel like they have no choice. If they want to do the right thing by the investors, they're going to go to the place where they're most well supported. So I think that's at least a domestic commercial threat. I think for wave energy generally, it's about achieving the cost reduction process, and ultimately, electrons are electrons, so we need to compete very much with the other renewable energy technologies. But by all indications, and I mean, the European Commission's done the analysis, so have others like IRENA, and they've projected what the cost trajectory is for wave energy. And we've done this work as part of the Europe Wave program. We had to get a third-party independent um, uh, analyst to check what our cost reduction process was, and it was consistent with what the European Commission had targeted. So I think if we can't hit that would be a commercial threat as well. This is a good one. How deep is a CETO unit likely to be beneath the surface? So yeah, we sit nominally a few meters below the surface, which we want to sit near the surface to capture maximum energy, but we also want to sit below the surface because you're away from the breaking waves, which have non-linear effects, which can lead to high risk of damage. We also obviously have the benefit then of the lack of visual amenity intrusion. People can't see CETO, and we can be located very near to shore without imposing on people's outlooks. So, but just quickly expanding on that, we're the only ones, as far as we know, who have a kind of dynamic depth adjustment, where as the waves get to their extreme levels, and bit of theory here for you, wave energy increases with the square of the wave height. So if you double the size of the waves, you go up by a factor of 4 in terms of the power. So we need to manage the power, and a bit like wind turbines, when they tilt the blades or feather the blades to avoid those high wind forces, we can also reduce our depth to manage those forces. And that's, I think, a game changer in terms of wave energy technology. I assume CETO units can be installed in a closer array over a smaller area than offshore wind. Yeah, I've seen everything from densities, like as in the footprint of a CETO or a wave energy farm compared to an offshore wind farm. I've seen anything from sort of 2 to 5 times the density. So meaning that a wave energy farm of the same capacity would take 2 to 5 times less area than offshore wind. So that's a really great benefit as well, just less consumption of seabed for our technology compared to the other major technology, which is offshore wind, both fixed and floating. Okay, I think we've reached the end of time, and therefore also the end of the questions. I really appreciate everyone's attendance, and you'll be able to get a recording. I think that'll become available, and you can also see these slides on our website as part of the ASX announcement. But just finally, yeah, thanks very much for all your support, and we really appreciate it. And we're going places, so stick with us.
Yeah, also thank you for me, and thanks everyone for joining.